and welcome to Therapist Underground, a podcast that examines topics with a mental health lens. I'm your host, Christy Tischer. In this episode, we're talking with Michael Evitz, licensed professional counselor and owner of Blue Owl Counseling in Wildwood, Missouri. He describes what it's like to be a counselor as he specializes in working with children, adolescents, and adults. Okay, we're here today with Michael Evitz, the owner of Blue Owl Counseling in Wildwood, Missouri. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us today. Let's talk a little bit about your road to becoming a counselor, first of all.
Yeah, well, glad you asked me that. So I originally wanted to be a psychologist when I was in undergrad. Mm-hmm. There was a few challenges with that. Some things I needed to work out. And when I was about 24, I want to say 25, I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do, but I know I wanted to help people. And so counseling was related to psychology.
Yeah.
Something I was already interested in. And so I started looking more into it. And you helped me with some of those ideas and prospects. And so that was an avenue that, I could help people. Psychology was interesting to me. Mm-hmm. I didn't know exactly what exactly I wanted to do with that. I had some really severe social anxiety at the time, so the idea of going to school for the next 10 years of my life, 5 years of my life, talking to all these people, that was very, very daunting for me. So I knew I was interested in psychology. I knew I wanted to help people.
Right.
I just didn't know what that next step would be. Mm-hmm. And you really helped me with those next steps of, hey, you could be a counselor. And so I started looking more into that, and I was like, this is definitely something I'd want to do. And it wouldn't be, I'd have to move out of state. I'd have to, talk to 15,000 admission counselors.
Right.
It's, do a doctoral thesis and all this. And so that's kind of how I got that started. Mm-hmm. But I guess more of a personal kind of objective was I've always loved helping and working with kids. Uh-huh. I wanted to, provide some, tools and just be a support for kids who needed help. Right. So counseling was my avenue to do that.
Yeah. What did you learn in your, what's something that stood out to you when you were in your graduate program learning how to be a counselor? Is there anything that kind of stands out to you from that?
Yeah. One of the things that was most helpful for me was the compartmentalization of, hey, when you're a counselor, you have to also take care of yourself.
Yes.
And without that, I don't think I would make it, because when you're talking to 20, 25 people every week, it's like you get really invested in helping them and making sure that they're heard and understood, but that can take a big toll on you. So if you can't compartmentalize, it's just going to weigh out you all the time. So that was really helpful, how much they focused on that, and then also just some of the tools they provided of, or maybe even just acknowledgement and permission. Hey, it is okay to shut the door at the end of the day and then open the door back, 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Mm-hmm. That's okay. That's actually good for you. That's good for your clients.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you just burn out so fast.
You burn out and it doesn't help anybody.
No, it doesn't. Yeah. Or they, clients can see you seem to be really upset by me telling you this, or, and it's, then they're, you're not that safe, neutral person for them.
Right. That's true.
Yeah. What about for you? Was that?
So they didn't really focus on that in my grad program.
Yeah.
And it took me years to learn those skills.
Yeah.
So, they probably did some, but no. I remember my early days, I would see maybe 12 clients a day.
Yeah.
And I just kept going and going and going, and there was burnout. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I know with your early career, you were doing some pretty intense work.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the suicide hotline.
Yeah, yeah.
And an inpatient facility.
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. It was trial by fire for sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. that definitely helped me also and maybe I was looking for that more in grad school of like, okay, what do I do just to survive through this, you know? Because I'm just like mentally and emotionally exhausted. And so I did a lot of that work when I was in grad school, or I started that work. I wasn't like a clinician at that time, but I was volunteering and, you know, I was working with patients at the facility. So I wonder if that's maybe where I like kind of latched onto those self-care or the care realization.
Right.
I also think you mentioned that a few times
Did
too.
I?
Like, hey, watch out for this. So that was like, I was really looking for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think to me, that's helped me more than anything. Like, yeah, there's tools and methods, but just like how to be a counselor and survive, like that's, yeah.
The
it's
process.
valuable. But sorry, back to your question. Yeah, it was the first few years were really trial by fire, and like I did do that intentionally to some degree. I didn't realize maybe how much it was overwhelming me and taking me in, but I also learned a lot, and so I knew that I was in my 20s. I didn't have very many responsibilities. It's like, yeah, I can do overnights, or I can do you know 50-hour weeks or 60-hour weeks. And and it wasn't like that every week, but there were weeks like that. And so, yeah, I somewhat intentionally and somewhat accidentally, and you know, some it was also just financially like, hey, I get overtime pay, so I can work 55 or 60 hours.
You do what you got to do. In those early years. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, especially before you're licensed and you know,
yes, absolutely.
don't get nearly as much money and
yeah. Okay. Would you feel like talking about some of the things that you learned as far as compartmentalization, like more specifics?
Yeah.
About how do you do that? How do you separate work and home and that kind of thing?
So, and one example, from the suicide hotline that I kind of learned, and is to try not to take things personally. With the suicide hotline, there's a lot of personality disorders, a lot of people who are really in need of help.
Yes.
Sometimes lots of drugs and alcohol, and sometimes they will completely project that onto you.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it really taught me, don't take this personally.
Yeah.
That's their issue.
Yeah.
This is not, you know, maybe there's some things that you need to do to improve, but when they're hurling insults or they're just in a drunken rage, like, but I also think that's helped me, you know, now as a counselor, is like, try not to take things personally. Sure, I'm human, that happens. But I mean, I really, really try to not even open my email, not take phone calls until I'm back in the office. And I, you know, if I'm starting to dwell on something, I just try to remind myself, I'll worry about that tomorrow. Or I'll worry about that, you know, when I come back into the office, if it's a weekend or something like that. What about you, though?
Well, it's funny, you know, when I was doing I did a degree in sign language interpreting, and there was a teacher there, and so this has nothing to do with counseling, but it applied. She said, it's not about you. And what she meant was, it's about the deaf and hard of hearing clients, you know, and it's not about you. But, you know, I took that, I'm like, you know what? Yes, that's true. It's not about me. And so the taking things personally, like I'm prone to do that, you know, just to like take it to heart and like feel emotionally beat up. And but it isn't about me. When somebody's upset, like if there's something I need to do differently, I can do that. But I totally hear you. Yeah, like giving some space, you know, between what they're saying and me taking it personally. So. The not about you thing, that kind of stuck with me. And maybe it's not a traditional way of looking at compartmentalizing, but if I don't do that, then those conversations or those things can just live rent free in my head. So like for me, that's where it starts. And it's also part as a counselor where you're trying to be in tune with a client's emotions, pick up and you know, feel that empathy and really understand where they're coming from. So you're in a lot of ways vulnerable. So when something does come your way, then it's like, oh boy, like, you know. And I think counselors are
we're naturally sensitive people.
I think
That's why
we are
we're
too.
in this profession.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and it's still a difficult thing, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's just interesting that you said that, because it's like, yeah, I struggle with that too sometimes.
Mm-hmm. There's also, I had a friend once who was also a counselor, and she would talk about, like, when you walk through a door, you imagine like a shower or like some sort of like cleansing, whether you're walking in the door to the office or out of the door to the office or from the office. You know, there's a kind of the doorway represents a separation.
Yeah.
And I'm not as mindful as that all the time, you know.
Yeah.
But that's kind of an interesting thing to think about, is like entering doors and what that door means to your life.
I like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd be interested in learning more about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit, if you're open to it, a little bit more about the empathy component. And I'm not even sure what I'm asking. So I'll have to think about this. But just how does... So you're an empathetic person. I'm an empathetic person. Do you feel drained at the end of a day, or do you feel like let's talk about energy maybe?
Yeah.
And how do you regulate your energy? I mean, coffee's helpful.
Yeah.
But do you have any thoughts about that?
And you know, I've been counseling almost 7 years, which is wild to think, but so it's like I recognize it and then I don't. And it's like by the end of the week, like my work week ends on Saturday.
Yeah.
I'm pretty drained. I don't always feel that though, but like I can tell in my behavior, like cranky. I don't want to be around people. I just want to be in a basement with the lights, and like so some of that's like, okay, maybe that's a little bit of burnout, but it's like that. I guess that's what I think about is like maybe I'm just so used to being drained by the end of the week, like I don't even recognize like I'm getting drained until I start seeing those like behavioral changes where I'm like, wait a second, what's going on? It's not like that every week, but for certain weeks, especially if there's some heavier topics or things that are a little closer to the heart, it's like, ooh, I can definitely tell by Friday and Saturday. And I'm trying to get better at recognizing my limits and that. But
that's good.
Yeah, I'm not always good at that, and I think I try to push back of like, oh, I got this.
Yeah,
or like this is my job. I know what I'm doing, and it's but like. Behaviorally, it's like, no, I don't have this because I wouldn't want to lock myself in a basement, you know, a few hours at the end of the week. So,
yeah, I tend to know when I'm kind of running out of energy when my car gets messy, or my office, there's like crumbs on the floor that I need to vacuum up. You know, like I'm not like keeping up.
And you're just like, it's okay.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Yeah, screw it.
Yeah.
Crumbs, who cares? And in a sense, who cares? You know, but that's my kind of like, there are things that I do too that I'm like, okay, I think I might need to recharge or just step away and like, you know, kind of center. So on Sundays and Mondays, I'm guessing those are the days that you are not in the office.
Yeah.
What do you do to recharge and kind of get ready for the next week?
Yeah, well, I really like to be outside and not in a... I'm going to be outside all day, but like I love to go on a hike where I get to just be by myself and just reflect and have some alone time. I like to walk my dogs. That's fun. I love to play with my kids. Like that is more rejuvenating than anything. It's like if we're out on a soccer field or if we're just, you know, I don't know, just being silly and able to do something physical. That recharges me so quickly. It's pretty amazing. Just catch-22 of that. Taking care of kids is also draining, but you know, like I love doing it. It's just like that can be draining too. So, and how I recharge at the end of the week's definitely changed as I become a parent. You know, like it was a lot, not better but easier. When I didn't have kids, and it's. Yeah, I can go off for 3 or 4 hours and just be alone. And I don't really, you know, that's not really an option anymore. So
it will become more of an option as your kids grow up.
Yeah.
Early childhood is somewhat challenging.
Yes, it's like, okay, I'm going to really value this 30 minutes I get by myself. My kid's asleep, she's taking a nap, like, All right, now's my time to shine. But yeah. What about you?
I like spending time alone. And like I don't do this enough, but journaling, I like to journal.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I like I don't actually enjoy the process of journaling, but I like the result of it. And so, it's kind of messy. But I don't do full sentences. I do like bubbles.
Yeah.
So, because writing is not my thing. But, spending time at home. I'm not a real nature person.
Yeah.
I want nature off of me.
Okay.
But I like being inside.
Fair. Yeah.
And talking to my husband and spending time with my kid too. Yeah, just things like that. Painting. I paint ornaments.
Okay. Yeah.
For therapy. It's cheap therapy, like $8-10 and you can paint an ornament.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, I feel like there's levels of appreciation for nature.
Yeah.
I'm like way down on the spectrum of like I like to go in a park on a trail.
Yeah.
I'm not, there's
Yes.
some people who like to camp. And
Yes,
some
camp
people
and
who
tips.
Yeah, so it's like I'm all the way over here. So I'm not that far off from you.
My husband is a cave archaeologist, and I've considered, trying, like, going into a cave to see see how it goes. And so I might try that at some point,
Yeah.
That might be a
You like
thing.
it.
Yeah.
There's no bugs in caves. I like that.
Oh, I
I mean,
didn't
or-
know that.
I mean,
There's
husband would
bats.
probably know more than me, yes, but I don't think there's bugs in caves,
Yeah.
which I like.
Well, that does help. Yeah. Bugs are a thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the kinds of clients that you really click with, that you really enjoy working with. Tell me about that, or the evolution of that, or just, tell me about that.
Well, I started working exclusively with kids, as far as like a traditional psychotherapist, counselor, therapist. And then I started working with older kids, so like teenagers. Then I started working with some adolescents. And now I see just about everyone. I'd say most of my clients are still, kids, adolescents, maybe people 20s, 30s, but I see a range of clients. And it is interesting because, I, like a lot of therapists, I started off just wanting to work exclusively with kids, but as I've got, more time, it's, even when I work with kids, I'm actually working a lot with adults.
You are.
And
Yes.
the more and more I do working with kids, it's like, the more I prioritize, okay, well, I need to work with the adults too.
Right.
Like the parents and things
Yeah.
like that. And give them tools, because I'm only with the kids, once every few weeks for an hour.
Yeah.
But the parents are there all the time.
Right.
So if I can give them tools and
Yes.
provide support, that might actually be more beneficial. Not to say that there's not a role for me working with kids
Right.
and helping them,
Yeah.
have some more insight or giving them tools. But it is, like I said, the older I get, the more it's like, what? Actually, if we can have a unified front here,
Yeah.
and I can help the parents, and then they'll help the kids too.
Right. That's true. What is it about working with kids that initially, or even now, you really feel drawn about or to? Like, what is it? about kids?
I couldn't tell you. I've always felt like that's just been a calling for me.
Yeah.
And I've always worked well with kids. I've always liked working with kids.
Yeah.
It's just, maybe it's they're pretty helpless in a lot of ways. They don't always have an advocate.
Right.
So if I can provide them a little bit of help, and it's not even that I'm always their advocate, because a lot of times I'm not, but it's like if I can give them tools to be a little bit more assertive or stand up for themselves, or just coach them through a hard situation, so then it's like, okay, well, now they can stand up to their bullies in the future. It's like, I feel like that does the most good, at least in theory. So maybe that's part of why I'm drawn to it. And that's something they can learn throughout their life. But
Right.
I also just think there's just, I've always been drawn to help kids. So.
Yeah. Are there any sort of like games or I'm thinking sand tray, or like are there any things that are kind of a go-to with kids? Because I don't work with kids, like I really don't know if this is a thing or not. But is there kind of a go-to that you do often? with kids?
Yeah, for me at least, I'm really big on just if we can start with the fundamentals of can they identify their emotions when
Okay.
they're experiencing it, you know,
Yeah.
where they're yelling and screaming, are they able to reflect, oh, I'm really angry, maybe I can, you
Yeah.
know, if we can get to that point, that helps. So it's a lot of like emotion,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
we'll just be talking, you
Okay.
know, there's some other games that we play, but it's a lot of, can we identify the emotions? Can we identify
Yeah.
it on our bodies? What does that feel like?
Right.
Morning times.
Yes.
And then if we can get to that point, then we can do a lot more things. But
Yeah.
first, we gotta start with
That
can
does
we
seem
identify them?
fundamental. Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess when I reflect back when I was a kid, like I definitely had big emotions, but I don't know if I always could put a name to the emotion.
Right.
I always knew what I was feeling.
Yes.
So I sometimes think we're a lot better about that as a society, and like let's actually teach kids how to deal with these emotions and
Yes.
let them feel these emotions, and also, you know, maybe just give them some tools when they are feeling really intense emotions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. When you work with parents, do you like share like this is what we're working on, or like how do you relate to the parents, generally speaking?
Yeah. So usually at the end of the session, for the last 10 minutes, about give or take a few minutes, I try to give them an update. You know, and there's a fine line there where I don't want to reveal everything the kid said, and I want to protect
right.
their confidentiality, but I also want to give the parents an update on what we're doing, what
Yeah.
they're learning,
Yeah.
how to help them reinforce some of these ideas,
Yeah.
things that they can do to support the kid.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, every client's a little bit different.
Yeah.
So if someone's really struggling with bully, that's going to look a lot different. if
Yes.
Maybe the kid's being a bully. So,
Right.
you know,
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
so there's definitely some variability there.
Mm-hmm. Is there any area of counseling or skills in counseling that you'd like to kind of like continue learning or like develop in the future? Is there anything you're kind of thinking for future?
Yeah, and maybe this wouldn't be something I'd want to pursue, but I've always been fascinated by marriage counselors, and like to me, that's like my worst nightmare is getting in the middle of like two, you know, very heated people on
Right.
times, and
Yes.
like trying to navigate that.
Yeah.
And like again, I don't know if I'd want to do that.
Right.
But so I'm more just curious and open to what does that look like?
Yeah.
You know, what are different methods?
Yes.
How does that, you know, differ from traditional counseling?
Right. Yes.
You know, because it is very different.
It is different. It's like the client in that situation is the marriage, not the people.
Yeah.
You know? And
Yeah.
so that puts a different spin on it, even in itself.
I know, and even you just saying that, I'm like, my mind is blown. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's wild.
That's something that I'm also curious about, but I have no intention to pursue.
Yes.
For me, I feel like I know my limits, and though I'm curious, I don't know that my limits will ever move in that direction.
I'm not sure either. And again, the more I learn about it, the more I respect marriage counselors.
I do too.
And relationship counselors, and they're so needed. and
Yes. Oh, there's.
I wish there was more of them.
Me too.
Yeah, I would never want to do it.
I have a few go-to people that I refer to, and you know, like it's nice to have a few go-to people.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't do this, but I know somebody good who does. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. As far as like also in the future, anything outside of counseling that you're curious about learning, or maybe within counseling, but like when you think about like just kind of growing as a person in the future, does anything come to mind like what you'd want to look at?
Yeah, and you know, this is tough because it's like there's a million things I'd want to do,
Yeah.
and I'm someone who I get another hobby every year, you know, and I pursue that until I'm bored with it. You know? So there's definitely some hobbies I would like to pursue. You know, I'd love to travel to ride more roller coasters. I'd love to, you know, play more games or play more board games and card games. And I'm really into some of the nerdier Dungeons and Dragons, things like that.
Yeah.
Reading fantasy, like I love all that stuff.
Right.
Not shy about that. I love that stuff. But as far as like maybe professional interest, you know, I'd eventually, I think, like to own maybe like an e-commerce site where I can maybe build something where there's a creative aspect. You know, I like to create like board games and things like that. And
Oh, I could totally see that.
yeah, and it you know, I'm not at a point where it's a professional level, but it'd be more of like, this would be a fun challenge for me to try to make this work. And
Yeah.
I'd like to just see where this goes. And
Yeah.
so maybe something along those lines. But at the same time, there's a lot of things I want to do, so it's hard to narrow it down
Right.
to just one. And
Yes.
yeah.
I've been thinking of something, in maybe a parallel vein, is like, what would it be like to have like an Etsy store or something that sells counseling related paraphernalia, like
Yeah.
t-shirts and, cups and stuff, So that's kind of been on my mind a little bit.
Yeah,
But-
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It'd be fun to have some mugs with,
Yeah.
maybe some therapy quotes or
Right.
something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, some good old, Albert Ellis or Carl Rogers, I don't know. So, Michael, what advice would you give to people who are considering going into counseling as a profession?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think that's something you should look into. And maybe even if you know any therapists, like if you have any friends or family, talk to them about it, ask about it.
Yeah.
There's also some really good YouTube resources. I know
Okay.
maybe some other social media, maybe on TikTok or things like that. Like, what's it like to be a therapist? Mm-hmm. I think it's a lot different than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
And that I think you go into it thinking that, you're going to change the world or you're going to, completely change someone's life 180 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times it is more about supporting people, giving them tools, but
Yes.
supporting people as they're going through life's challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good and bad. And sometimes it's very challenging. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's heartbreaking.
Yes.
And so really, I guess what I'm trying to say is know what you're getting yourself into.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a great profession, but it's also something that will probably change you over time and in good ways and maybe not so good
Tough ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think every profession does that. But yeah, for example, I think I and other therapists, we're just so used to having real conversations
Yes.
that small talk is just, it's insufferable. It is very hard to go to a party and just engage with someone in small talk. And not that it's not an important skill.
Right.
And I understand why people do it. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yep.
It's just, it is very hard to do it when you've had, 20 conversations about really important things that matter
Yes.
to people. That are values focused. And
Yeah.
I hope that doesn't sound snobby. It's just
I don't think it does.
it just changes how you view
Right.
situations and people and values.
Yeah, I have a really pretty low tolerance for, outside of, the therapy office, for things that don't matter.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, I hear what you're saying. I'm not also trying to sound snobby either, but just, I really prefer, what is really going on with you? Tell me the real stuff. And,
Yeah.
weather, I'm a weather girl, so I love weather, but, talking about weather and stuff is kind of like, oh my gosh,
Yeah. And maybe all just some vanity things, where it's man, this stuff doesn't matter. I've seen it so many times where you could have whatever, this really prestigious job, but if you're miserable, it's none of that matters.
Right.
And
Right.
so I guess it changes you in that way too.
Yes, it does. Uh-huh.
It makes you think about your values more.
Mm-hmm.
I also, I think if I were just to be completely vulnerable and honest, is I also think you can kind of avoid your issues by talking about other people's issues
I
too.
think that's a fair assessment.
And so I think a lot of counselors are people who struggle with things, so they're human.
Yes.
Or, maybe they've had experiences where they want to help other people because they've been through something.
Right.
So that is noble and good. And, I think we can all relate to that. But I also think it can be really easy to get lost in helping other people and avoiding your own issues. And so I guess that would just be a caution of,
Yeah.
make sure you know why you're getting into it. Is it because you think it'd be a useful profession, or is there something else? And if it's something else, that's okay, but
Right.
you also need to be honest about it.
Right. And if there is something else, to seek your own therapist and work on that for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you can't be a therapist, of course, because we
Yeah.
all are human. But one of the things that I'm really amazed about, and I was just thinking about this as you were talking, is how important the therapeutic relationship is and how changing it can be. Just the therapeutic, like just the alliance of therapist and client.
Yeah.
Have you ever had somebody like talk for a session and be like, you know what, I'm already feeling a little better just having talked about that? Have you ever heard
Yeah,
that?
I have. Yeah.
And I'm thinking, wow, really? Because, I really was just listening to
I
you
know.
and reflecting things
Yeah.
back. But I don't know if this was in your grad school, but in my grad school, they were like, the therapeutic alliance is one of the most important.
Yeah, they
things.
did. Yeah.
And I was like, okay, sure. Okay, whatever. But it's true.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. Yeah. And, it's more important than any method you use or methodology that, and methodology and, the tools we use, like, they're important, but it doesn't matter if the client doesn't feel connected or trust you.
Right.
And so I think that is so fundamental. Maybe that's another, like, if you're a new therapist, focus on the relationship.
Yes.
You absolutely have
That's
to.
the most important thing.
Yeah.
I think.
And especially with kids, it's like, okay, if they're dreading coming into counseling or they're viewing it as a punishment, then you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, that's just fundamental. So the kids have to be invested, and they also have to see that you're optimistic and believe in them. And
Right.
like they can trust you. And that you're someone who is motivated in them getting better and feeling supported.
Right.
But it is so important.
Yeah.
I feel like that's more important than anything. It's also why I think going back to earlier, like sometimes it does hurt when a client, client's like, you know what, I don't think this is really working.
Right.
It's like, oh man,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I know, yeah. And it's okay, and therapists are kind of like shoes. Sometimes it's a good fit, and sometimes it's not.
That's true.
And objectively, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. I think that is the most important thing, and I think it is so important that should be your sole focus when you start off as a counselor. And yes, using other methods, but that should be what you talk to your supervisor about.
Yes.
Hey, what was that session like? Did you feel like you created a welcoming environment,
right.
a trusting environment? Were you working at goals together, or were you lecturing to,
right.
things like that?
Yeah. I think back in my own training and like professionalism, and I'm not knocking professionalism because that's a great thing to do. But I guess as you get more experienced, like I don't feel the need to wear like heels to the office anymore.
Yeah.
I tend to wear like a black t-shirt and jeans and some variation of that. And I'm just very real with my clients. Like if I'm a couple minutes late, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I had to go to the bathroom real fast.
Yeah.
It's stuff like that, and it sounds so stupid, but like transparency and just being real, I feel like, if somebody doesn't like me for that, then I'm probably not the match for them.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's just a kind of an interesting thing that as you evolve, like how you do things evolves too.
I agree. Yeah. And I also think that in general, counseling is starting to move in that direction slowly but surely. It used to be you didn't self-disclose at all. And now there's, some methods where it's like, no, actually, if you're not genuine with the client about your own issues, then this isn't going to work. And yeah, people debate that. And there's still conversations around that.
Right.
But to your point, like, I think it's okay to say, I got stuck in traffic and I was late. I'm so sorry.
Right.
Like, that's just being honest and genuine.
It's being human.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, you're not coming down and giving them advice.
Right.
It's like you're walking with them as I
think that is so key. Yes, the power different, like coming alongside them is like a beautiful thing, and there's an equality there. They come to this with life experience. They come to the table with,
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff. And so I really like that idea of like coming alongside.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's something that's changed in me too. And, I think for a lot of people who start counseling, there can be a little bit of an imposter syndrome. So I think you can almost react in a way where it's like, okay, well, they need to see me as competent. So I'm not going to say anything about myself, or I'm just going to, maybe not even, I'm not going to be genuine with them because I'm afraid that they'll see through me.
Right.
If that makes sense.
And yeah, I've been there.
And then as you get more experience and more confident, it's like, okay, well, if they saw through me, it would just be, I'm human.
Yeah.
I'm just figuring this out like you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have superpowers. I'm just trying to help you, and I'm here to listen. And
Right.
be an open person for you.
Right. And kind of that reflect back what you're hearing, and some of the things we do actually learn in school.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
reflective listening.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you feel like we should talk about that we haven't talked about, or that you're wanting to mention, or?
I'd be curious about what advice would you give to counselors, like people who are looking into counseling, or maybe new counselors. Like, what have you learned, and what advice would you give to them?
I think it's a lot of what we've talked about today. I mean, learning, like reflective listening, that kind of thing is like those are important skills and very much needed. But maybe first, like looking at themselves and like what do they need to work through, because we don't escape unscathed. So what do they need to work through, and being willing to do that. And really maybe asking a lot of questions. Let's say that somebody's in school, I would say ask as many questions as you possibly can.
Yeah.
When I taught at UMSL, I loved it. UMSL, which is University of Missouri, St. Louis. I taught in the graduate program just a couple years ago. And I loved it when students had questions, and it led to discussion. And so questions, I think, is a really big thing. And being willing to be who you are, because I think you're so right about the genuine, like being genuine and authentic, and the coming alongside. So there's a lot of you're right. There's a lot of vulnerability with being a counselor, and so being willing to be vulnerable, I think, is but also it just seems like we do so much walking in two worlds, and I don't know exactly what I mean, this is all kind of a new thought, but just vulnerability, but also confidence, and those are not opposed to each other, but we're kind of it feels like there's the fluidity or something. I mean, I feel like I'm kind of...
No, I think I get what you're saying, though. Yeah. It's like humility and openness, and also, it's like you're confident in who you are, and your ability to help and listen.
Right.
And,
yeah.
It's also you're giving advice, but also, So I get what you're saying.
Right. Yeah, and it's audio doesn't reflect what I'm doing with my hands. But just this idea of kind of walking in two worlds at the same time. And I went to school with somebody who wrote a poem about this idea of two worlds, but when somebody comes in and all they do is cry, we help like build them up so that in situations maybe they don't. But that's not necessarily the goal, or if they never cry, one of the goals in my own mind would be like help them be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so we're always maybe assessing, and it's just
Yeah.
I don't know if I have English right now, but this is a great profession. I have no regrets. I love what I do. I love that I've gotten to do research along the way, and I don't plan on stopping that, but this is a great thing to do with one's life, I think.
I wholeheartily agree with that. And we talked a little bit about how it changes you. I'd say most of the changes are for the better. I would agree. It 100% makes you reflect on your values. every time you come into the office, and it's like, okay, well, what's the most important thing here?
Yeah.
Like, and you can't help but say, what's the most important thing in my life too? You know, and it just makes you think about some of those things.
Right. Real quick, why Blue Owl Counseling?
So I could give you the official answer, and I could give you the real answer. I'll start with the official one.
Okay.
You know, I like the idea that owls are wise and that they have, you know, viewed as wisdom or, you know, you're trying to gain knowledge. They're majestic. I also think it's fun and inviting for children.
Yeah.
The real answer is owls are my favorite animals, or one of them, and blue's my favorite color.
Okay.
So
that works.
I was just looking for something that might be inviting, but also stuck out a little bit.
No, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being with us today, and I look forward, maybe we can have another conversation in the future.
Yes. That'd be
Okay.
great.
All right. Thank you. Michael and I covered a lot of different topics, and I hope he returns in the future to continue our discussion. If you would like to know more about Michael's practice in Wildwood, Missouri, you can visit Blue Owl Counseling Mo. That's blueowlcounselingmo.com. I want to thank Michael for being our guest today, and thank you for tuning in to the first episode of Therapist Underground. Tune in next time when I speak with Pagina Brown, who will talk with us about autism and how it presents differently in males and females. Thanks for listening.